Welcome to Running the Table, the podcast where we run through everything on the table in the world of college basketball. Loss number 2 on the season comes in the second of 2 games on the West Coast. It wasn't even a fun game to watch with the low scoring from both sides. UCLA came out with the win, and we all went to bed annoyed. But without further ado, let's run it. A frustrating game ends in a frustrating loss. I can handle losses when we just play poorly or just miss shots or just get flat outplayed by a better team. But this felt like a combination of missed opportunities, poor strategy, and some mind-boggling decisions made by the coaching staff. Screw the normal recap structure. Welcome to my Purdue basketball TED rant. The subject, Purdue versus UCLA, final score 67 to 69. We're going to start off here talking about the starters. Not their best performance by any means. Starting off with Braden Smith, who played 37 minutes with 12 points on 5 of 13 shooting, 2 for 5 from 3, with 3 rebounds, 4 assists, 4 turnovers, and 2 steals. He was not as sharp as usual. A lot of those points actually came late, with a couple of big buckets down the stretch, really as a big part of putting Purdue ahead for the little bit of the second half there when we extended that run or extended that lead, on the other hand, all the way out to 6 with a couple minutes left. But unfortunately, 2 of those 4 turnovers came within the last minute, 2 minutes it was. And those were 2 very crucial turnovers that allowed not only UCLA to come all the way back, but also to put the nail in the coffin with that final 3 there. Secondly, we go to Fletcher Lawyer, who I can only describe his performance as frustrating. He ended up with 5 points in 27 minutes, 2 of 10 shooting, 1 for 6 from 3, with an assist, a turnover, and a steal. Quite honestly and quite openly, if he's not making threes, take him off the floor. I love the dude. He's a great player. He's obviously a staple of Purdue, and he's been nothing but an elite shooter over the last 4 years, except for his slumps. And he is very much in, hopefully, the tail end of one, but he's still in it right now. And I'll get into more about his performance a little bit later, but there was some things about this game and his performance that I think directly tied to us losing a little bit of that lead that we built up in the middle of the second half there. Moving over to CJ Cox, though, he was fantastic. He played 30 minutes with 16 points on 6 of 11 shooting, 2 for 6 from 3. He was a perfect 2 for 2 from the free throw line as well, with 5 rebounds and 4 assists. Fantastic. He also had 2 steals, no turnovers. I mean, one of his best overall complete game performances, other than probably the Baha Mar, but really just because of the fact that he was the only bright spot on, quite frankly, both offense and defense. We had some other players that put some decent stat lines, but you talk about a two-way player, he did it on both ends of the floor in this one, in a big way, quite frankly. Moving over to Trey Kaufman-Renn, who honestly put together a much better performance, even if it wasn't a super high scoring one in comparison to some of his previous games. They did just kind of generally limit him relatively well when he did get the ball. But he had 10 points in 26 minutes on 4 of 6 shooting. He was 0 for 2 from 3, so those 2 misses were both from 3. I don't necessarily blame him for taking those 2. They were both kind of, well, one of them was just a general kick out 3. The other one was right at the end of the shot clock, and he just had to get it up. But he was 2 for 2 from the free throw line with 7 rebounds and 5 assists. So honestly, probably the closest overall that he's been to triple double watch with 10, 7, and 5. But the effort was very much there. He was a very good rebounder in his minutes, but he only did play the 26 minutes, so we did have him off the floor a fair amount, but not because of foul trouble this time. And then lastly, Oscar Clough, who I also can only describe as a no-show. In his 24 minutes, he had 6 points on 3 of 5 shooting, 0 for 1 from the free throw line, 4 rebounds, and a turnover. And 3 of those were offensive rebounds. We'll get more into that later too. He just didn't look like much out there. The energy level wasn't fantastic. He wasn't rebounding as well as we're typically used to. The 3 offensive rebounds is great. He tied Jacobson for the most offensive rebounds on the team. They both had 3. But he just, for being the typical dominant force and the super efficient scorer, he was still 3 for 5. But it felt like he didn't even give himself that much of an opportunity against a particularly weak front court. And that is frustrating. That it felt like this should have been the game where he and Trey Kaufman both dominate. Now, some of it was, UCLA was doing a good job double teaming the post, and they did more to Trey than they did to Oscar. But he's typically found a way through that. And maybe that was some of we didn't really set him up nearly as well as in other games. I think our offense just obviously generally wasn't clicking as much as typical. But I don't know. It felt like he was a pretty much non-factor when he was out there, and that is very unusual for a guy that's been a huge bright spot for the majority of this season. Now I want to move over to a statistic known as box plus minus, and I found this on sportsreference.com. I was very curious about this game and some of the players' individual performances, which caused me to go look for this stat. And to define box plus minus, the definition is a box score estimate of the points per 100 possessions a player contributed above a league average player translated to a league average team. That is word for word definition given by sportsreference.com. Essentially, it's how does your performance compare to an average player? Typically, +5 means you played pretty well, certainly above average, 0 being pretty close to dead average, and negative meaning a below average performance for an average player. Fletcher Loyer had negative 8.5. That's not good. I would not consider Fletcher Loyer to be an average player. I think he's a very much an above average player. That's the reason he's included in the big three. But in this slump, and in this game particularly, that negative 8.5 stands out a lot to me. And I'm going to get into a whole conversation about his overall performance and the way I think the coaching staff handled it. But he played bad. When he's not making shots from three, I wish I had a better way to put it, but he's not worth putting out on the court. And he made his first three this game, and I thought that was a really good sign and that we could get him going. And then he went back to being cold. 2 for 10 overall, obviously the 1 for 6 from three. I just think there's something to be said about mid-game adjustments by knowing your personnel. But behind him, I mean, we had other players. Oscar Clough, negative 3.3. Daniel Jacobson, negative 3. The center position was bad. At least with Fletcher, you could take him out and you had guys that were positive. There were guys that were very positive off the bench that came into play these minutes. Namely, you see Jakari Harris with 28.9, CJ Cox with 20.7. Both of those guys, fantastic. Even Trey Kaufman-Renn, you'll see in this, has a 19.8. So those three were the major bright spots in this game. But I definitely want to focus on CJ Cox and Jakari Harris. CJ obviously showed up on the box score, both on offense and defense, but particularly because when you put up 16 points and lead the team in scoring by a long shot, you're going to get noticed as a key player for the game. But he also had 2 steals and was consistently, when he was on Donovan Dent, making a significant impact on the defensive end. Whether or not he got a steal or just made life difficult. And life was not made particularly difficult for Donovan Dent a lot in this one. Those 2 guys, CJ Cox and Jakari Harris, made the biggest difference on the defensive end, whether they were on Dent or not. But those 2 are pretty much the only guys that had success on Dent. But overall, it's an interesting stat to look at, and I'm intrigued in future games to take a look at those, or even go look at those these kind of stats for previous games. But certain performances or certain stat lines certainly led me to be interested in the concept of box plus minus or just plus minus stat in general. But moving on to the bench bright spots. I just mentioned Jakari Harris. He is probably the main one that I have to bring up. He was really the only other primary on-ball defender who looked comfortable out there and really has looked comfortable lately, especially with Braden's knee injury, with that knocked knee that he ended up getting against USC. Jakari Harris is our most capable on-ball primary defender, not named CJ Cox. Obviously, CJ Cox is out there because of how good of an on-ball defender he is and how good of a shot maker he is off the ball, and he very much showed that in this game. But Jakari Harris is proving that is a role that he can significantly fit in for that bench group. And he had 7 points overall. He was 2 for 6 from the floor, only 1 for 4 from three. But even if he's not making those threes, he still looks pretty confident in them. You'll see him fire away, and some of them, I think it was at least one or two this game, were a little contested. And I know that he wants to be a catch and shoot shooter, kind of regardless of whether or not he's wide open or not. I would encourage him to use a little bit more of his slashing because I know he has that ability to get to the basket. And especially with him being as much of a catch and shoot shooter that he is right now, I think that he could catch a lot more teams off guard if he utilized a little bit of a pump fake and used his athleticism to get to the basket a little bit more. But overall, he was huge. I mean, I mentioned he led our team in box plus minus 28.9. He was big time, and I wish that we would have gotten more than 14 minutes out of him. Another thing I'll continue to talk about here in my future segment here. But moving on to Jack Bender, he was also another guy, very solid defensive effort. He didn't necessarily stuff the stat sheet, but you could see and feel his presence out there. On the defensive end, he is a guy at 6'6" that you could put on a wing, you could put on a forward, and he would still have a lot of defensive success, especially in a game like this and a forward like Tyler Bilodeau. Bilodeau is 6'9". He's a pick and pop power forward. He does not want to roll. I don't necessarily want to put Jack Benter on a heavy rolling power forward, but this was a game that felt like it was tailor made to put Jack Benter on that four and really disrupt a guy who has been, major for UCLA, leading their team in scoring, averaging 18 a game, only ends up with 14 in this one, but still obviously some extremely crucial buckets down the stretch. I really am feeling very encouraged by Benter's defensive performance, and he was 0 for 2 from three in this one. I think he would have probably seen more than the 14 minutes if he was able to knock down some of those threes. But his presence was felt, and he was a big part of the run that Purdue was able to go on in that second half there when we put Braden with a couple of those bench guys in there, and all of a sudden the defense started rolling, and we got some momentum and were able to knock down some shots. Overall, there was 18 total bench points for Purdue to UCLA's 0. Certain bench lineups looked more effective than the starters for stretches of the game, like I mentioned with that second half run, which is moderately concerning, but I'm not going to complain about bench production. We want those guys to be productive when they come in. I don't want it to be, a significant step down unless the starters are just playing that well. This game was not one of those games. So to get those 18 points was big, but it just proves that the starters really struggled in this one. But going to the bench weak spots, mainly one being Daniel Jacobson. He had an easy missed layup / lob, whatever you want to call it, where I believe it was Braden who was able to throw it over the top to him, and he took it, and instead of going up with it, came back down and tried to wriggle around to the opposite side and put up a rather wild shot and really wasn't even that close. He just plays weak sometimes, and today was a game where he was just really, really weak, both offensively and defensively. He struggles to get in much of a set position to be much of a traditional post scorer. Most of his scoring is going to come off of offensive rebounds and putbacks or lobs. The ball screen action didn't really get him a ton of lobs in this game. He had 4 points on 2 of 4 shooting, one of those misses obviously being the layup that I talked about. But I also saw Xavier Booker go straight through his chest down the lane and lay one in right over the front of the rim. Xavier Booker, the guy who in 2 years couldn't sniff the court at Michigan State and played a grand total of 2 minutes in UCLA's last game because of how disappointed and upset that Mick Cronin has been at Xavier Booker's play. Xavier Booker played 35 minutes in this game, and he looked not only serviceable, he looked good against our front court. Supposed to be one of the best front courts in the nation, or at least the Big Ten. Not today. Not at all. Xavier Booker had 9 points on 4 of 5 shooting, 1 of 2 from 3, with 4 rebounds. And 3 blocks, by the way. 3 blocks. Jacobson looks almost unplayable at times. And this was I think it was a big part of the reason why he only had 16 minutes. But the problem was his Clough was no better. box plus minus, those guys were both pretty much even. You could see on the court, both of them felt like rather non-factors, and that was really tough to watch. Um, Probably the most concerning stat of it, him and Oscar Clough both got 3 offensive rebounds apiece. Clough had 4 total. Jacobson had 3 total. They combined through 40 minutes of basketball for 1 defensive rebound from the center position. That's horrible against, once again, what is supposed to be one of the worst front courts, at least in inside play in the Big Ten. Bilodeau's great at outside scoring. He shoots 45% from three, something like that. He's a fantastic shooter. He showed it in this game. But they're not good inside. They're not a good rebounding team. They're not a good interior defensive team. Well, could have fooled me in this one. They had 8 blocks as a team. Um, but yeah, 1 defensive rebound from our centers. That's bad. But moving on, I want to talk about some of the coaching decisions because this was one of the few games that I really felt that Painter got outcoached. Not even just Painter, the coaching staff, because the offense didn't look that great under PJ Thompson either in this game. Maybe it was they that UCLA just made a lot of great adjustments, or with Braden Smith playing not at 100%, you could kind of tell his knee was definitely bothering him some. He was still moving pretty good. I think you saw it more on the defensive end than the offensive end, but the coaching felt unusually poor. The first thing I want to talk about is the defensive strategy guarding ball screens involving Donovan Dent. Donovan Dent had a game, 39 minutes, 10 of 18 from the floor, 1 of 3 from three for a guy who going into this game shot 4 for 26 on the season from three. 2 for 2 from the free throw line, 13 assists to 2 turnovers, a steal, and 3 blocks for Donovan Dent. Yeah, but specifically the ball coverage, I mentioned he shot 4 for 26 from three going into this game. We decided that the answer was a hard hedge, and you could see it all game. Whoever was screening, typically a lot of the time it was Clough, but obviously Jacobson as well, typically 5-man screens. And Clough or Jacobson does that hard hedge out to try to push the point guard back, push Dent back before then trying to be able to recover to his assignment, and then move on from there. Dent, first of all, was very honestly Braden Smith-esque in terms of utilizing the timing to get around those hard hedges, using Clough or Jacobson as a almost secondary screener of his own to disrupt Braden Smith or CJ Cox or whoever was on him as he went to drive around. He dissected them. We really didn't have much of an answer when it came to guarding those ball screens, except for CJ and Jakari. They guarded those much better. There was a fair amount of time where Braden was guarding Donovan Dent through some of the rotations, and it just didn't really work all that well. Which brings me to my second point, which I'll kind of morph into this first one. Guarding Dent with anyone other than Cox or Harris. We switched a lot of ball screens if it wasn't a ball screen with a big, which meant that Fletcher Lawyer was guarding Donovan Dent a fair amount. Switching Braden Smith on when we were trying to have Smith guard, whether it be Trent Perry or whoever else was on the floor at the other guard position. In a game where Braden's knee is struggling, there's no good reason to let him be the primary on-ball defender on Donovan Dent when all they wanted to do was just put you in ball screens. But what I don't understand with the hard hedging side of things is why would you not just execute drop coverage? Painter and Purdue's defensive staff knows full well the benefits and importance of drop coverage when you have a center that doesn't move that well. Clough moves better than Edey, but also is not by any means a quick on your feet defensive center. And Jacobson may be a bit quicker, but he's not fleet-footed. He's not quick on his feet. He's just a little too Bambi-esque out there to be particularly effective in that type of coverage. But especially on Donovan Dent, a guy that 4 for 26, that's like 17, 18% from three on the year. Now, he hits one in crunch time in this. It was a huge three right towards the end there. But he was 0 for 2 before that. And he, in general, does not want to shoot threes. He wants to get in the mid range. He wants to get to the basket. He did that time and time again in this game. Why are we not playing drop coverage on him? If he wants to shoot a mid range jumper over Oscar Clough or over Daniel Jacobson, let him. That's especially with CJ or Braden, whoever's guarding him, or Jakari recovering, force him to make a tough mid range jumper over your center. He's not going to stop and shoot threes very often. And if he does, unless he started making a ton of them, I'm going to live with that. 17% three-point shooter, I'm going to dare him to shoot those threes because that's what you want as a deep force him into what he's bad at. Instead, with the hard edge, we forced him into the mid-range. We forced him into getting downhill, going to the basket and attacking the rim. And clearly he loved that. 23 points. And he's been struggling a bit this year. He has not been the Donovan Dent that everyone thought he was going to be coming into this year with the amazing season that he had with New Mexico last year. So I don't understand that. Which also brings me to our final defensive lineup. On that last play in which we gave up the game-winning three, we, out of the timeout, put the lineup of Braden Smith, Omer Meyer, CJ Cox, TKR, and Clough. We're up one in this scenario, 67 to 66. We know what they're going to do. It's the same way that people know what Purdue is going to do if we have a possession like that, side out of bounds, 30 seconds left, whatever. We're going to put you in a ball screen. And UCLA said, we're going to put you in a ball screen. I'm sure that Purdue knew that. Why Omer and why the traditional 4 and 5 of TKR and Clough? I get that the rebound is important, but with the way that Jakari Harris was defending, the way that Jack Benter was defending, even the way that, obviously in that run that we got out of the lineup with Daniel Jacobson. I'm not necessarily going to argue with Clough, but I am going to argue with putting Clough on Bilodeau when you've been cooked to this point. Bilodeau was 3 for 7 from three. So he's already made them. He already has made his money in the pick and pop. That's all he wants to do. We know that that's what they're going for. I don't get it. When that happened, it wasn't even a particularly contested three. Clough stood no chance getting back to that. And Painter had doubled down on his statements. He said, we thought that Clough was going to put us in the best scenario to be able to get back to that and guard that. I just, quite frankly, disagree. In a scenario like that, the extra couple of inches of height, or more than a couple, extra 4 or 5 inches of height, does not make up for the fact of him not being able to be there to make any contest on the shot. If that's me, I'm probably going Braden, CJ, Jakari, Benter, and either Clough or Jacobson. Put Clough or Jacobson on whatever big that is not Tyler Bilodeau, or quite frankly, whatever other guy that's not Bilodeau. If you want one of them in for the rebound, put them in the opposite corner of that play, because chances are it was almost guaranteed that Bilodeau was going to be the screener in that scenario. We give up the three. And there's not much else to say it other than that. I think there was a lot smarter lineups you could put out for a play like that. And it just didn't work out the way that they wanted to. I just think it was preventable. But lastly, it's bringing Fletcher Loyer back in when he was already cold. I get this whole discussion, this whole debate about Fletcher Loyer and his slumps. He's very much in a slump right now. It's been something like 75, 78 attempts going back to the beginning of December, in which he has not been the level of shooter that we expect him to be, that we come to know him as. There was a midpoint in this game where Fletcher Loyer was 1 for 4 from three. And we had I want to say 4-point lead at the time. And we bring Fletcher Loyer back into the game after going on a bit of a run to extend to extend the lead to 4 with 6 minutes to play. Donovan Dent makes 2 free throws, cuts the lead to 2, and that was we brought Fletcher Loyer in on that possession. Over the next minute, 2 straight possessions, two straight Fletcher Lawyer missed threes. One of them was wide open. I believe it was a kick to the wing. They just had some rotations that didn't work, wide open. He missed. That was what got him to 1 for 6 on the game. And the following possession off of that or off of the first rebound actually was a Donovan Dent jump shot to tie the game at 58. I know that we in Fletcher Lawyer we trust. We know that he is going to break out of this slump. I just don't understand. Know your personnel. Fletcher Lawyer is not a shooter where you are going to have a 1 for 4 first half, 1 for 4 game, and he's going to come out and light it up. And he's going to come out and break out of his slump mid-game, mid-performance in the second half. That's not the shooter that he is. And if someone wants to go find stats and dig up a game where he started off cold and ended up making 4 threes in the second half, by all means, prove me wrong. But that is not the Fletcher Lawyer that I'm used to seeing. When he is on, he is on. When he is off, he is unfortunately off. He made that first 3, misses his next 5. I don't see a good reason to bring Fletcher Lawyer back into this game when he is struggling so much, and we know that he is not going to provide anything of value on the defensive side of the floor. When you have guys on the bench like a Jack Benter, like a Jakari Harris, who were putting up very solid defensive efforts, were the only ones really that were able to disrupt UCLA's offense in the second half consistently. We get a stop every once in a while here and there when they just missed a shot. But in terms of consistently getting stops and going down on the other end, making a difference, building momentum for Purdue, those 2 guys on the bench were the biggest contributors for that. Taking them out of the game to bring Fletcher back in that scenario feels like a just missed opportunity because those other guys were proving that they were the better players in this game. Not that I'm saying that Fletcher should be benched, not that I'm saying that either of them are better players than Fletcher is overall, but in terms of two-way players and providing more defense in a game like this with guards and wings like UCLA has and how they are performing, it's the mid-game adjustment that I feel was missed just for the sense of Painter likes sticking with his guys. And he believes in Fletcher Lawyer. He's believed in him since day one. I get it. But I don't think leaving him on the bench for a couple more minutes, taking 5, 7, even 10 minutes out of his minutes in this game would count as not believing in him. It's a game script thing. Fletcher Lawyer would get that. I truly believe that. He is very much a leader on this team. But missed opportunity, I think. Fletcher Lawyer comes back and, quite frankly, I think is a pretty decent part. Even if you didn't see him getting beat on the defensive end directly as a primary on-ball defender, I saw some things where he just was not there on the defensive end. He was not useful, especially in help defense, which if you're not going to be the primary on-ball defender, which of course we don't want him to be, you better be active in help defense, especially with a team like UCLA that is going to drive like this. But moving on to my final section, in which I am dubbing the response to Greg Waddell's points from my arguably favorite podcast to listen to, especially about Purdue basketball, but they cover a lot of Big Ten basketball. Sleepers Media. You can find them on YouTube. They are the ones that are the home of the Running Point with Braden Smith podcast, another great podcast to listen to within their channel. But Greg Waddell, in their hour 40-minute recap of this game, had quite a few points that I just flat out disagreed with, particularly on Fletcher Lawyer and his performance. First quote is, "You can't be concerned when the best shooter in the sport is missing wide open shots." And my response to that is, I'm not concerned with him missing. I'm concerned with how the coaching staff is approaching the mid-game adjustments in a close game while he is clearly cold. I'm all about giving him his shots, giving him his opportunities. He's not going to make shots again unless you give him those shots to take. But in a game like this, you can't afford to give him those minutes, give him those shots, and hope that he makes it when he was clearly cold for the first half, 2/3 of this game. Very much missed opportunity there. Secondly, quote, "You lost this game in part because Fletcher Lawyer missed 5 wide open threes. You do not win this game with anyone else on this team taking those shots. If you take him out, the spacing gets harder for everyone else, and defensively, Fletcher was uninvolved in the defensive issues this entire game. I'm going to say categorically false on most of the points in this. Maybe he wasn't an on-ball issue necessarily, but as I mentioned, as a secondary defender, as a help defender, I saw multiple times where there was little to no effort to disrupt Donovan Dent or Eric Daly Jr. when a drive was made inside the paint or to the mid-range area as a help defender. He wasn't even there. And Jakari Harris looked great on the defensive end with his 2 steals in just 14 minutes, I believe. Um, yes, 14 minutes. He ends up with 2 steals. He looked great. You had a fantastic defensive option who arguably was shooting just about the same as Fletcher Loyer. And also, Fletcher Loyer coming out doesn't drastically change Purdue's spacing on the floor. You put Jakari Harris in, you put Jack Benter in. Both of those guys are pretty much doing the exact same spacing that Fletcher Loyer is. Maybe he has a better instinct working off of Braden in terms of finding the open spots on the wing, but both of those other guys space just as well as Fletcher. They don't muck up the inside and, take up room from TKR or Clough or anything like that. So I don't understand the argument of that spacing gets harder when you take Fletcher Loyer out. No, we have plenty of other guys that can shoot and will happily stand out on the 3-point line just like Fletcher does, and can put it on the deck and score at the rim with about the same success as Fletcher does, other than his weird one-legged floater that he does really well. It's a game script thing. I don't agree that Fletcher Loyer was the catalyst that having him in gives you the best chance to win when he's clearly in this big of a slump. And I know I've talked about him a lot, but unfortunately, that's what a lot of these points were about. There was a lot of intense conversation on that recap episode about Fletcher Loyer because he was a rather volatile player who had a rather emotionally charged performance, at least when it comes to how you feel about it. And lastly, in a very interesting point of his, and Carter is his co-host on this podcast, was per 100 attempts, a Fletcher Loyer 3 will score Purdue more points than an Oscar Clough 2. And he was pretty adamant about this. And this is just, once again, flat out wrong. And this time, there's math to prove it. Let me introduce you to some simple math courtesy of YouTube commenter at Tim Johnson 9849. Thank you, fellow Tim. Loyer shooting 100 attempts from 3 at 44%, which is his shooting percentage on the season for his sophomore and junior seasons, and right about what his shooting percentage was before this big slump, would put up 132 points. Those same 100 attempts from 2 on Oscar Clough's 76% shooting from the floor would put up 152 points, 20 whole points more. And let's take that one step further. If you take those 100 attempts from 3 from Loyer at his 37.5% shooting percentage, which is what his percentage is now, including his amazing start to the season and this slump, that only puts up 112 and a half points, rounded to 113. We're not even taking it to the point of running those numbers with his shooting percentage in this slump, which has been about 27%, I believe. So the math just quite frankly does not add up on that. And I think it is asinine to say that you would take Fletcher Loyer shooting more open threes compared to Clough shooting more hook shots and layups. He's been the most efficient scorer in the country this season. How could anyone be scoring the ball better than him, at least efficiency wise? So that one just made no sense to me. And thankfully there was math to prove it. So thank you, Tim Johnson, for that one. But all in all, is the world falling apart? Absolutely not. Will Purdue be fine? Most definitely. We're literally 17-2. Will Fletcher Loyer break out of his slump? Almost guaranteed. He pretty much always does. Not even pretty much. He always does. He's gone through this every year. And will it likely happen very soon when you factor in those yearly slumps and how long they typically lasted? Yeah, there's a chance it could happen next game. There's a chance that could be just within the next, week or so. And when he does, he will probably go on an absolute heater for like a month, shooting 50+% from three, because that's what he does. But would someone other than Fletcher Lawyer have helped us win this game if given 10 of his 27 minutes in this game? I wholeheartedly believe so, especially with how some of those bench guys were playing. And I blame the coaching staff for that amongst other things in this game. Because obviously there was quite a few things that I think that they did wrong overall or could have handled better. But coming up next, we get the chance to come back with a vengeance against a surging number 11 Illinois Fighting Illini team who are marching into West Lafayette, winners of their last 8 games. It will be one hell of a battle. I expect Purdue to come back with a fire lit under them, and I know the paint crew will be right there with them for all 40 minutes. But that's all I've got for today. Life does indeed go on, and we'll have plenty more good basketball to talk about soon. But please let me know if you agree or if I'm crazy with some of my frustrations about this game. Either way, life does go on. But if you want more from us, like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, I'm out.